Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. In this episode of our little pod, we're going to do something very G&T and start a little series looking at the underlying philosophy of one of our favorite psychologists, one Carl Jung, which is very much in the spirit of our little podcast. The only thing that is maybe a little different, because we've done episodes on Jung before, is that we are going to look at his stuff via the work of another really interesting, if less famous figure, the modern philosopher of consciousness, Bernardo Kastrup. So, from a Buddhist Tantra point of view, this would be what might be called a commentary, and they'll do that. They'll do commentaries and commentaries on the commentary. So, that's kind of like the space we're in. So, we'll get to learn more and think more, not only about Carl Jung, but we'll learn a little bit about this Bernardo Kastrup along the way, because he's kind of an important person thinking about the mind and consciousness and what to make sense of all that. So key ideas maybe for us will be something like how does Jung think about the different parts of the psyche and how can that be helpful to us as spiritually curious people? But before we get into the good times of talking about all that, if you could do all the usuals that people ask you to help all of our spiritual curiosities, like, write a review, subscribe, share an episode, to help get out some more of this spiritual useful stuff that we're trying to do and get that like through the algorithm out to people. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Labor of love for us, right? As we always say. All right, Daniel. I mean, just out of curiosity, we know a lot about Jung, but have you heard about this Bernardo Kastrup guy? Has he crossed your path before?
He has not crossed my path, but I have not been looking for a lot of men named Bernardo. So
If you're not looking, you might not find. That's
that's
true.
right.
Seek and you shall find. Someone famous said that.
That's right. I believe that is Matthew.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And then the guy he was writing about. Okay, so with Jung, I mean, we've done multiple episodes on this. I think this should be kind of a little bit of a different take because what this Bernardo Kastrup is trying to do is get to like the underlying philosophical ideas, or even what you might call metaphysical ideas that underlie Jung, which is interesting because Jung is a psychiatrist, but he also does have a lot of ideas that you might say are philosophical or even metaphysical. If you're not familiar with that term so much, just the idea of like what's the nature of reality, deep spiritual stuff is like within Jung for sure. So he tries to like take this apart. But if you're not familiar with Kastrup, I'll tell you a little bit about him, and I don't know, maybe if you have any follow-up questions on it, Daniel, I don't know. But I don't think Kastrup is like obviously not as well known as Jung for sure, but he is kind of a presence, and he's kind of an interesting person. He was originally from Rio de Janeiro, and then he eventually ended up in the Netherlands. His background is more IT and kind of AI oriented stuff. So I think he made his living and whatever fortune he has kind of through that. But what that seemed to have taken him to was an interest in things like consciousness, philosophy of mind. And so he's kind of in that headspace. And he writes a lot of like interesting philosophical kind of stuff around this. And I think another thing interesting about him is he sees himself as kind of like an independent scholar and author, which is a cool idea. He's just sort of a free floating thinker. He's not tied to any particular institutions, and he makes a kind of a big deal about that, especially because he feels like it puts him in a position to advocate for ideas that might not be as overall popular. So one of his big things is like to challenge the idea of like materialism in a really deep way, not just materialism in like shallowness, but materialism like the philosophical idea that the world is made up of like material stuff. He's more of what you would call an idealist, that he feels like the world is really made up of mind and consciousness as opposed to physical stuff. And in some ways, that's kind of out of sync with our present time. But he's a very interesting kind of person to think about with this. And obviously, in the Asian spiritual world, there's a lot of that kind of conversation about to what extent
Yeah.
is things really made out of consciousness and mind, and what's the connection between mind and body, and what's the connection between mind and the universe. And so, it's kind of in our wheelhouse, all of this kind of stuff. And he's a very thoughtful person on this, Castro, and pretty deep. So, anyways, that's some background on him. Um, we're looking at him like looking at Jung, like kind of considering those two, but he has sort of books written around these general ideas too. So, all right. Yeah, and yeah, again, in terms of the Buddhism stuff, I kind of jotted this note down for myself. I've been very interested in this question kind of personally, so it's kind of fun, I think, given where my head space is at too. And there's this kind of famous quote in parts of the Buddhist world where the Buddha will be kind of described as saying all the world is only made up of mind. And then the big debate is, well, what does that mean exactly? But that's
Hmm.
kind of some of the stuff we'll be exploring too. You got thoughts on that before we jump in? And
No, no, we're good.
okay, one other thing about this, there's some prelims have here. Is Bernardo Kastrup kind of a complicated thinker? My thought is, yeah, he has some really deep ideas. He's talking about difficult questions. So this is a kind of an episode that, if you like it, you might find yourself like going back to a little bit to explore his ideas more. In looking at his book on Carl Jung, I have it as an audio book and I've listened to it like a number of times.
And
Just
that
knowing,
one's decoding Jung's metaphysics, correct?
yeah. hmm
Okay.
That'll be kind of the basis for our conversation. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I've listened to some of his other things, and it's the kind of thing where you're like, okay, I'm interested. I don't know if I agree with everything, but I'm interested. And you might find yourself going back to it again, going, okay, let me really think about this because he's a deep person. I had a funny experience with this with a student, on campus, Daniel. I was teaching a class on physics for Chinese medical people. It's one of the things that I do. And he kind of came up in the conversation, and there was a student in the class who was like a really big fan. And
Oh
she was
wow.
dropping all this stuff in the chat. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And I did say, like, I think he's really deep and interesting, though he's kind of complicated. And she, like, obviously loves him. So she was like, no, he's not
Hmm.
complicated. And I was like, he kind of is.
Hmm.
And then I talked about, his connection to Asian culture, especially Advaita Vedanta, right? He has lots of connections to sort of like yogic stuff and the idea of the divinity wanting to know itself or something, this whole
Hmm.
Indian philosophy that part of what happens in creation is God wants to be able to create so he can look at himself for something.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
which is a very uh prevalent thought in those traditions.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, he has a lot of connection to this. And she was like, no, he doesn't. And I was like, I think he does.
It definitely does.
And so I had a break and I went in and I kind of went to like just the Wikipedia page on Bernardo Kastrup. And I just took a screenshot of the whole part where he says, yeah, I'm into this.
Hmm.
And I kind of showed it in the class. And I wasn't trying to be mean to the student. I was just saying, oh, this is kind of cool. Like he's interested in this Asian philosophical stuff. And I never saw that student again.
Yeah, I was gonna say because you're rubbing their nose in it a little bit there,
Well,
guy.
I didn't mean to. It wasn't my intention. But like disappeared from the class, dropped the class, never saw her again. And I was like, dude, I just was like showing something else. I was like, it should be okay. Anyways.
That's a not, yeah. But when you bring screenshots and you're, someone's they don't come for, yeah, you went to war a little bit. Like, that's
I
all.
I really didn't. I was just like had to teach a class. So I was like, hey y'all, I just went and took this thing. And like he is interested in this Asian philosophical stuff, and it's cool. And
Well,
like
keep in mind you're the teacher, Eric. Everybody's
my
listening
job
to
to
this.
do that.
I understand. I understand.
So I was like, God damn, this person, did they get pissed off and just drop the class? I'm not
Well,
sure.
probably better to send them that as like a direct message than,
Oh my God, fuck that. I mean, like, it's just something in the class. You're just like, hey, this dude's into it. It's cool. Like,
yeah,
can't be that
yeah.
sensitive. I don't even know if that's the reason why. I might be wrong.
No, no, that's totally why.
Well, that's a little overly sensitive, I think. But anyways, we can
Yeah, well,
debate
it's
that.
just a brief aside, and there's a lot of online learning that happens now, right? Particularly post-COVID. Pre-COVID, it was like what? Phoenix University was like the online thing, and that's pretty much it.
Trump University, was that online?
No, I think that was imaginary, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
that was
got it.
everything is the mind in a sense. So yes,
Yes,
it was
right. No,
all it
real
was all
money, imaginary school.
well, it's all the mind
Yeah.
ultimately.
But I think that, there wasn't online learning wasn't a big deal, right?
Mhm.
And then obviously post-COVID, that's remained that way. And it sort of changes the dynamic, I think, between teacher and student a little bit because you're not there in person and I don't know. I just feel, I mean, obviously you've taught infinitely more than I have, and I taught a little bit before and a little bit after, but it definitely felt a little bit different afterwards, a little more disengaged. Um, it's already hard enough to get students to talk just in general, but
Mhm.
when you're teaching online, then it's even easier. People turn the screens off and it just I don't know, it seems more like a different kind of chat room. I don't know, from my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I have been honest with this is like kind of an aside to the thing, but I've been honest with students about it where you'll ask a question. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get no one wants to put a wrong answer in the chat. So I get why no one wants to
Yes.
answer these things. Right. because you
Mm-hmm.
feel kind of mortified if the answer is wrong. And so I just accept that, you know.
Yeah,
I had the thought, like, as I was pulling this thing, I was like, well, I just wanted to make the point that the
sure.
guy's into it. And like for us as TCM people, it's cool to know that there are people out there advocating for traditional Chinese medicine. That's what I'm teaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, as like people are interested in these Asian cultural ideas and these spiritual ideas, it's cool to know there's people who have some name recognition who are out there advocating for these things. I wasn't trying to
Yeah.
like, here, let me
Poop
give
on
you
your
some shit
dreams.
about the fact the fact
Yeah.
that Wikipedia disagrees with you. That wasn't my thing.
Oh,
But
there's
I
your
was just like,
hero.
okay, here it is, you know.
Yeah.
But she was on fire. She was really like whatever about it, and maybe she dropped the class for other reasons or whatever it is. But I thought it was awesome that she knew who he was. So if
Yeah.
you happen to listen to this, I loved what you were doing. I thought it was great,
Yeah. Come on
and
back.
it's also cool that he's into this. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
So a little anecdote from our actual lives. Um, I mean, the other thing I wanted to say about Jung again, and I kind of just had this thought, you know, we're recording this, who knows when you'll be listening to this, listener, but we're recording this in May of 2026, which is, you know, kind of a relatively shitty time for the US and hence the world at large. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens as we go forward. But as I was thinking about Jung, and this was like, you know, part of the reason why I wanted to do it too, Jung lived through really bad times. He's part of that group
Sure.
of people who had to live through World War One, and then he had to live through World War Two. And when we get to some of his things, he was even having like nightmares and visions from his point of view about World War One before it even happened. Like he could
Yeah.
feel that things were heading towards really dark places. And I think it's interesting then when you have people who've their work has grown out of difficult times. You know, I think there's something comforting about that.
Yeah. Like Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl's like that. I like Einstein a lot. I mean, when I really thought about it, they're in that same time frame, probably give or take, and he had to live through
Yeah.
two world wars. And there's a quote from Einstein where he says something like, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, I like science even more during difficult world times because it puts me in touch with things that are kind of real, you know?
Mm.
And it gives you a chance to kind of look at some of the deeper parts of life and not just get rolled over in the chaos of like, you know, the bigger social world, the bigger geopolitical world. And so I thought it's kind of a cool time to talk about Jung because his work grew out of those time periods, right?
Yeah.
And you know, he wasn't not in those spaces, he was, and this is kind of the kind of stuff that he talked about. Okay, so that's my prelims. Anything else before we do it from you, Daniel, or keep
No,
going on?
just want to give a special shout out to one of our sponsors for the episode, Air.
Mhm.
Breathe it. It's good for you. So big shout out to Air.
Sponsor under special sponsors. Yes. Air or chi in the Chinese.
Yes.
Um, okay. So for talking about Jung, this Bernardo Kastrup divides up his ideas into like a few major topics, and we'll kind of check them off as we go through. If you do get interested in the book, is it Decoding Jung's Metaphysics, right, Daniel?
Hmm.
Yeah. So he's going to talk about psyche. If you know Jung, he's going to talk about this idea of archetypes and synchronicity. Then kind of like just maybe the philosophy or metaphysics that he sees in all of this, summarizing it, and then Jung's ideas of religion, or we might say spirituality for our pods. So we'll probably do episodes around these things. We'll get a chance to explore this stuff. All right. So the first of these is a discussion about psyche. And so one of the things that Jung does that our Bernardo Kastrup points out is he divides the psyche up into sort of like three different parts in kind of a really interesting way. I have like a psych degree, so dividing up the psyche in different ways isn't that unusual. Like really famously in the Sigmund Freud world, you have the id, which is kind of like the more biological drives and needs, and we're going to have Jung's take on that too. And then the ego, your sense of self, and then the superego, which is sort of like the values that you take on from the society and the culture. So Jung was, you know, kind of a protege of Freud's. You can get this idea of dividing things up into different parts. I think those parts are really interesting too, but uh, from you know this presentation around Jung that we're looking at, the vision gets into like three different kind of layers within the psyche, and he's going to talk about body, psyche, and spirit. This kind of three-part division, and this division also deals with like the other big question that's going on in this whole thing, which is what's the difference between having things that are conscious and things that are unconscious, and how does this stuff all fit together? So that's going to be like kind of our first subject matter here. I think looking at this idea of conscious and unconscious, these are really big questions, right? So maybe it makes sense to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll do the three-part division if you're cool with that, Daniel.
Yeah.
So I think as clinicians, we think a lot about conscious and unconscious thoughts. I know you and I think we both do, right? This is a big deal for both of us, right? And in the Chinese medical world, there's a lot about how the mind and the body interconnect with one another. So the basic idea is that there can be emotions, thoughts, memories that affect a person so deeply that this can create physical symptoms, sometimes physical symptoms that are really bad, right? And I don't know from your work, but sometimes when you talk with people about this, I think people could be shocked at like how much these thoughts, emotions, memories can really fuck with the body. It's
Hmm.
very deep, right? And some of the symptoms are really extreme. So people can faint, people can have tremors, people can have things that are like debilitating pains. People can lose. I had a patient who like had so much of this sort of emotional trauma and stress built up that she lost vision in one of her eyes. Like it can be pretty dramatic. So I don't know. Part I want to share about that part is I think a lot of times people don't realize if you don't work in medical circles like how intense these symptoms can be. Don't you think that's true, Daniel?
Yeah, and even like less intense on the scale of like extreme physical symptoms. I've been talking about this with this whole week basically. I've been having the same conversation with people, so I'm going to have the conversation here because this is the place for me to share those kinds of insights. I don't know about you, Eric, but I treat probably mostly neck pain in the clinic.
A
I
lot of
would
neck pain stuff.
I would say out of 100%, neck pain is probably 65 to 70.
I know like that big for me, but obviously it's a pretty common
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And what I've found a couple things is that people don't breathe well. So I'm going to be featured in a little magazine coming up here in June. I'll try and link it to the Instagram whenever I get it so people can read it and whatnot. And one of the things, the questions the lady asked me, she's like, "What could people do to improve their health right now?" And I said, "Shut your mouth." I like
Okay.
literally breathe through your nose.
Mm,
And the reason being is that to your point, people tend to change their breath pattern when they are under stress.
mm,
And so some of this is a physiological response to fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system. And so the breath gets a little bit more shallow. They breathe with their mouth. But what ends up happening, and I apologize for those people who are just listening, but your rib cage, the rib cage lifts. It lifts up. It pulls up to the chin, as opposed to the
yeah,
diaphragm
you
kind
really
of.
get like all this pressure will build in the chest, right?
Yeah. And so in order to accomplish the breath, you have to use these muscles, these secondary muscles of inhalation in and around the neck and the traps to lift the rib cage up towards the chin, as opposed to your diaphragm descending down towards the hips. And the problem then, in the short run, that's not a big deal. Body is adapting to momentary situations and it's fine. But, in agreement and in reality to what you're saying about the body making changes to the psyche, if you are experiencing yourself under threat or under duress on a normal basis, you're going to be in that state more often than not, meaning you're going to be breathing through your mouth more often than not, meaning you're going to be using these secondary muscles of inhalation to do your primary respiration more than not. And then muscles that are not supposed to be used that frequently for those purposes are going to become taxed. And then you get supreme tightness in and around the neck. You couple that with being over screens, over your phone, looking down, forward posture from sitting in the car in traffic, or typing all the time, and you get this like rounded posture. And it's just very, very, very common. And what I see is that I'll sort of like press on people's like just behind their their collarbone here in this sort of soft space.
A lot of
And
like
I mean,
scalene kind of stuff going on
yeah,
there.
scalene stuff.
Yeah.
People go through the roof, and I'm not even pressing very hard.
Yeah.
And then I'll sort of guide them to like, hey, when you breathe in, you should not be feeling the pressure from my hands by your collarbones here. Your lungs don't need to lift when you're lying down and breathing slowly. And then after a few breaths, they get it. But
Yeah.
it takes time to like relearn, and you could see their brain like reworking itself to not return to that pattern of breath, which is a pattern of pain. And so all of these, and I'm saying all of this because the psyche kind of habitual tendencies that get absorbed, genetically or socially or whatever, manifest in the body, and then the body stays that way, moves it forward, and then it becomes more of a problem as time goes on. So, anyways, that's a practical experience from what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, I know with those muscles, the Zen people I was studying with initially when I first got interested in all this Asian cultural stuff and uh, body mind connection, they talked about those that lifting thing a lot too. I mean, like if you're, it's the scalenes a lot of the time, right? Which is this like
Mm-hmm.
also group that does this thing, and it's really affected by like physical trauma too, like whiplash injuries was part of their point, right? And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people have these like lingering car accidents where there's been whiplash stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you take that a little further, then you're also thinking about how this connects to some of the not the acute injury, but the psychological stress of the repeated stressors day by day, right?
Yes.
And the internalization of this. So, I mean, part of the insight, and then, with our Jung thing, Jung is around people exploring this, and he's exploring it, which is this idea that these unconscious things, these, you could say, unprocessed thoughts, feelings, and memories, like kind of build up and they can affect people either psychologically, which is you know these unconscious things can build up not only in the body and we'll get symptoms there, but it can also affect the person in terms of like what otherwise would seem like they're kind of conscious thoughts. These unconscious things kind of put this pressure underneath, and this starts to affect the person's thoughts, feelings, and then even their behaviors. So this was the idea of like the personal unconscious, which I still think is like one of the major psychological ideas we got down to the present day, right? That all of this stuff gets stored up. So, in our culture now, we talk a lot about like trauma, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
is kind of where the trauma kind of sits in this kind of personal unconscious. Jung is going to like expand this and like take this in other directions, but I think he still believes in this thing. And I think you and I believe in this thing too. There's this personal unconscious feature going on, whatever words you like, right? And we've done different kind of psychological episodes where people might use different words, but that's essentially what you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, as far as our pod, if you want to roll back, because some people really like this one, we did a thing on the defense mechanisms from Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, and we kind of took those all apart. And there are people who are kind of into that because we went to a lot of the detail of what this looks like, right? And that could be spiritually helpful too, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
recognize those things in yourself when these unconscious personal things are putting pressure on you inside and either creating physical symptoms or making you act weird, which it can
Mm-hmm.
do, right? So that's a thing. So this conscious and unconscious thing, if you're in on that, you're already kind of part of the way in. But then the whole question that Jung is trying to think about and Bernardo Kastrup is trying to think about too is, well, okay, so how does that kind of totally work? Like there's a conscious and there's an unconscious, and how do those things fit together, and how does this fit into like the overall structure of how you might imagine our internal worlds are like, what our psyches are like? Okay. So what happens here, and when I'm reading the Bernardo Castro stuff, I'm always like, does this seem like this is what Jung is saying? And I think this is what Jung is saying. So he breaks it down in a really interesting way. He's still going to do like a three-part thing, but he's going to talk about, like we said a little bit ago, body, psyche, and spirit, that we have these like multiple levels in who we are. And for me, Daniel, I don't know, looking and reading this stuff has been very like, okay, that's an interesting way to break this down, right? There's going to be part of what you're going to feel that's going to be coming from the body itself. There's going to be part that's going to be coming from what we're going to call spirit. And we'll have to take that apart to figure out what that means.
Hmm.
Right. And then we'll think about what this has to do with our maybe more individual sense of ourselves. So I think it's a really interesting kind of a breakdown. It fits into a lot of things where you break things up into threes. Like that's a typical thing to do in our traditional Chinese medicine kind of Taoist world. We talk a lot about the three treasures, right? Kind of like what they call essence or the body, the energies, and then the Shen or the spirit. So that kind of resonates with that kind of stuff too. And there's a lot of these little three-part divisions, right?
Yeah. Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
The Trinity. Yeah, the mystery.
Mm.
Let's explore the mystery of faith. That's the Catholic way of talking about
But
that.
not the Trinity from Neo. A different Trinity, Eric.
Is Trinity the lady in that thing?
She she was and she is.
She's the one who ends up playing Hogarth in the Marvel universe, if I have that right.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. So good actress for these things. So, okay. So the interesting thing about this, and I think this is like definitely in our pod wheelhouse to talk about. So the
Mm.
body is going to be the source of what you might call drives or needs. So they use that kind of language. And these are kind of then instinctual and very physical, right? And this puts pressure on the psyche, these parts that come from the body. Now,
Yes.
one of the interesting things about this in the Buddhist world, potentially, and in the Bernardo Kastrup world, uh, for sure, and in the Buddhist world, would be that when you think about the body, and this is like, again, kind of a tricky point, but one that we're here to talk about, is that like when you think about the body and your experience of the body, one of the ways of looking at this is to go, all that really happens that we experience is really only coming from the mind.
Mm.
That we can't experience anything else except our own minds, because what else would it be? It's always our minds. Even when we're experiencing our own body, we're experiencing it through our mind because we're experiencing it like through the sensory aspects of things, which are actually Kastrup is make a big deal about this. Jung cares about this. I think Buddhist Tantra and spiritual traditions care about this. One of the If you flip the script and you say, okay, what am I really experiencing? You could say, what I'm really experiencing all the time is my own mind. Even when I'm taking in sensory information from the outside world, what I'm really experiencing is my mind. So sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, all these things are sensory things that are ultimately being processed like through the mind. And there's no
Sure.
other way to know the world except through the mind. And that's even true of like our own bodies. What we're getting through that is like our mind's experience of the body, which can't do anything else except come through like the sensation of tactile stuff, right?
Hmm.
We can't know our body kind of like directly. What we really know is some interconnection that we feel coming through like to our mind. So this is like what's the mind only point about a lot of spiritual stuff. And Kastrup is into this, and I think Jung cares about this too. This recognition that what you're really doing, if you take that attitude and you take a step back, and it's a deep kind of Buddhist point or a deep Asian spiritual point, or maybe a deep spiritual point overall, is that all the time we say outer world senses, we say our body, but what we're really experiencing of that is whatever is actually coming in through the mind. So, in this way of thinking about dividing up the psyche into three, kind of what you're talking about is the sensory information that's coming from the body that you're experiencing, like in your mind, because there's no place else to experience stuff except in your mind. And then whatever you're experiencing of like sort of the pressures within the body, the what they're going to call drives and needs. So hunger and thirst and whatever the body is sort of triggering, right? And its connection to the mind. And this is, I mean, this is a fucking deep question. Obviously, right? This is like getting to the heart of some of the deepest spiritual stuff. This is what Jung is trying to deal with, what our Bernardo Kastrup is trying to deal with too, which is going to be what's then the connection between the mind and the body, and that's super difficult. But anyways, we're in that headspace. I'll throw it back
Mm.
to you, Daniel, because it's such a deep thing. It gives us a chance to think about this kind of like wild kind of question because it's a
It's such a
wild
deep
one.
question. I'll let you handle it first.
Well, I was trying to talk about it. I'm like really
Yeah.
fascinated by this. It's
Yeah.
always been
So
kind of this deep thing. It's not easy at all.
So um there's a piece of the Zen teachings that I really like in reference to this, and they'll say that, the experience of the true experience of one's own mind is on the path of enlightenment, right? And they say it's like the tongue tasting itself, or the eye seeing itself, right? Or the sound of one hand clapping, right? So this sort of single flavoredness. I believe that is this kind of discussion. And, to the question of like mind and body connection, I don't know. The way that I think about it is that my, I have a problem with the word mind, actually. I have a problem with the way that the word mind is understood. I think that and we should maybe talk about this before we even move forward. Um, the definition of the word mind, I think when people understand or talk about it, what they're really saying is brain.
Hmm.
And the brain, in the way that most people are going to discuss it, is not body, right? It's a separate thing. It's like everything is in the brain. Mind is inside of the brain, and the brain is above the body. The mind is above the body. And we have feelings, but feelings are again going to the brain slash mind. And I think this kind of reductionistic view of mind as brain, brain as mind, uh, limits what I think these people are trying to say, or at least the Eastern philosophical schools are definitely not saying brain. It's not brain, body, speech, it's mind, and mind is not limited to brain. So before we move forward, I wanted to kind of,
Yeah, it's a pretty wild question. And then, this episode's like this one in particular, we do a lot of deep stuff,
yeah.
but this is getting to like some of the deepest stuff because there's a really deep question of like, what's the connection between if you whatever word you like, and these words are all super fucking slippery. I agree with you. They're all really slippery. And then like what people actually mean when they use them is like
Mm-hmm.
then kind of like enmeshed with that slipperiness.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're really like, again, this Bernardo Kastrup guy cares a ton about this, so this is going to weave in and out of these conversations. But the one of the big questions is like, what is consciousness then?
Right.
We're all having our own subjective experiences, right? From one point of view, and you get this in like the Buddhist world, if you really like get critical about this and you look kind of deeply, you'd have to answer the question of like, well, guess all I'm really ever experiencing is my mind, because I
Mm-hmm.
can't really experience anything else because there's no way of knowing anything else kind of directly. All I can really know is my mind. Even when I feel like I'm feeling sensations of the body, what I'm really feeling is like sensation, which is like part of the mind. If you take that attitude, if you really try to
Yeah.
flip this script, and that is a difficult thing to wrestle with, I think, as a 21st century person, to get yourself in that mindset because we don't
Mm-hmm.
walk around in that mindset. You know,
Right.
we walking around in the mindset of like, well, there's all this material stuff around this, and I'm a body and I'm moving through a physical world, where I think, at least in part, what's happening in Jung, and then I think this is part of why this Bernardo Kastrup is interested in this and likes Jung, is because you're trying to flip a script. So I don't know, even just as an exercise, and you'll do this in the Buddhist meditative world, is you go like, well, let me take the attitude of that. Let me just try on what that feels like. Whereas opposed to saying everything is physical all the time, we flip that and we try to go, let's like acknowledge the fact that what we're really experiencing is kind of mental. And that's the exercise that they're asking you to do here. So
Mm.
think about it for yourself if you happen to be listening to it. I take this exercise on too, because it's part of like trying to understand aspects of like Buddhist tantric philosophy or Asian philosophy overall, right? Zen, like these kinds of things, is to take that exercise and like try to say to yourself as you go, actually, what I'm really experiencing is like my own mind all the time. Let me just do that as a thing that I try to acknowledge. Then you get to a deep question of like, what's the relationship then between what this body is doing to the mind and what the mind is doing to the body? That's important too. And we care about that a lot, obviously, is like Chinese medical people and people interested in like the mind body connection. But this is the idea of like flip it for a while and just see what it feels like. Like you actually kind of recognize to yourself, well, I think I'm seeing things through my eyes and it looks like an outer world that's independent of my own mind. But let me try the exercise of going, it's not really like that. When I see something or I hear a sound or I'm interacting with things in a weird way, if I follow this kind of logic through, what I'm really getting is all the time my mind. Even if I'm
Mm.
doing like a brain study,
Hmm.
and Kastrup makes this point, and I'm looking at the brain, I'm actually looking at my mind's interpretation of the brain.
Right.
Or even if I'm a great physicist, like we talked about, like an Albert Einstein earlier, who, like on some level, if you have a great physics theory, it's a product of your mind producing it.
Mm.
So it's kind of trying to take on this kind of more radical attitude and explore it a little bit of what it would be like to think about yourself as like mind and consciousness, which is kind of tough for 21st century people because it is all of this is kind of intrinsically challenging
Hmm.
and slippery, but probably really slippery in our culture.
Mm.
I think Kastrup's point, writing as a 21st century person, Jung's already passed away, right? But I think Kastrup's point would be something like we live in such a materialist kind of paradigm. We think so much that way that it's hard for us to like even start to explore these kinds of ideas because they're it's just not how we're trained. And what do you
Hmm.
think about that, Daniel? I mean, it's a deep point, obviously, but
Yeah,
there's
but
a
I
lot
mean
of
that was
layers to it. But yeah,
yeah, I mean that's what I was kind of saying earlier with like the brain and the mind being sort of viewed as simultaneous, as the
yeah.
same thing, sort of just locked into this one particular piece of material. And, you and I really didn't discuss it, but for the last few minutes, I'd like to do that. Like, how do you view mind?
Well, I mean, I'm like attracted to like sort of this like a lot to do with it. I'm still exploring it, as we all are, but I'm very attracted to sort of these like Tibetan tantric things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, you know, uh, and it comes from the Zen thing too. I always think about like Hosokawa Roshi, my initial Zen teacher back in the day when I was in my 20s, would say, okay, well, there is the body and there is the mind. And if you think about those things as if they're one thing, like if you try to reduce it to the idea of like your mind is just a like a byproduct of the functioning of your brain or something, or even the functioning of your body overall, the kind of biological robot thing, that's wrong. That's not correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you have to deal with and think about the fact that the body and the mind are somehow interacting with one another and influencing one another, right? So it's kind of a Zen take. If you think about body and mind being the same thing, Hosokawa Roshi would say, well, that's wrong. you know but if you don't think about the body and mind influencing and impacting one another, well, that's obviously wrong too. So you have to kind of find this spot. That's a very Zen thing to say.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you get what he's getting to. You have to deal with both of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, but in the Tibetan tantric world, there's a whole thing about you meditate about kind of disconnecting, feeling the disconnect between your spirit and your consciousness and your body. Like that's a daily meditation for me that I do over and over again, right? In the tantric Buddhist tradition, you kind of are kind of asked to do this like multiple times a day. Let's imagine what it's like to feel my mind separate from this body, you know? Because in this worldview, Shen or spirit or consciousness or whatever word you like, right? Whatever word fucks with you when you like, interacts with the physicality of the world and then separates from it. So there's something
Mm-hmm.
about trying to get this feeling that, you know, what we would call spirit or something connects with body and then disappears from body and it goes back and forth like that. So I think I've been so influenced by that affects how I think about this,
Mm.
you know. And then the idea would be, I don't know, again, like we were on retreat, we did our retreat, and then I was on retreat after our retreat. And, again, deep ideas through this particular whole episode. But, in this point of view, when you look at like someone passing away, like the death of a person, what's happened? Well, the mind and the body have disconnected from the spirit and the body have disconnected, the mind and the body have disconnected. That energy that is the mind or the spirit is traveling along its way, and that body's dead, right? And that body's gone. And we're going to be talking a lot about consciousness in these episodes, right? So in this way, like what's the difference between like a corpse and like a live person? Well, that Shen, that spirit, that consciousness, that mind is no longer attached to that body. So that body's just material and that other stuff is gone. I guess if you're a pure material person and that's not an un like reasonable position, sure, you might say, well, the computer just broke and there's nothing else. So that laptop broke, this body's dead, it's broken, that's the end, it can't produce its things. But that's not the attitude that I follow, right? I'm more into the idea like, yes, something has happened, and like in our Chinese medicine world, we say, how does a person be conceived? Spirit connects with genetics and or essence, and now we have a new person, and that happens at the conception of that person, and then at the death of that person, then that's gone. But it also has to do with like what our consciousness is, because in this way of thinking, our awareness, our consciousness is coming from this Shen part, this spirit consciousness or mind part. So that's how I tend to think about it. That's a pretty traditional way of thinking, admittedly. Maybe a little bit outside the box though for 21st century America, because we don't always talk that way.
Mm.
But I think that's what I think for me, what's interesting, I think in Zen or in Buddhist Tantra or in a lot of the things that we're interested in, that's what they're trying to explore, right? What's this connection between like spirit and body, and like what does that totally mean? So that's my thoughts for what it's worth. I can throw it back to you if you got other things you
Yeah.
think are important to say about that,
Yeah.
but that's kind of the space I tend to come from.
Yeah, no, and that's, I mean, I think that is a traditional way of, well, an Eastern traditional way of thinking, not a
Yeah,
Western.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, and we've been having these discussions for a long time. I feel like there's a localized phenomenon and then uh, diffuse or universal phenomenon. And so, as we are, because we're in a body, the the sort of diffuse or universal phenomenon becomes congregated in an area and localized to us here. So, and we've used this example many times, but the example of a radio. So the radio waves are mind, but the radio station, i.e., me, you, whoever's listening to this, is also mind. There's no difference between them. It's just that the density has changed, or however you want to, call this energetic process from being everywhere to being somewhere. But you're somewhere, you're also still part of the everywhere thing. If I take a drop of ocean out of the water, I take a drop of water out of the ocean, that's still ocean. It's just in a little container. Does that, yeah, make sense? So
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, that's generally kind of how I feel. And then the influences from the body that is being inhabited by this localized mind influence the mind, and then vice versa. So there's this sort of experiment that is mind influencing body, body influencing mind, and in each of us individually on a one-on-one basis. But then I do think that the collective gets influenced, gets uploads by the experiences of people. Because I just, that's just kind of generally how I think. I mean, that I don't know if that's a common thought or uncommon thought, but I tend to believe that. And the reason why I believe this is we are a lot less tolerant of hate, bigotry, and suffering now than we have been in the past. It doesn't mean that those things don't happen. They
Or
do.
doesn't mean in the things that we've been talking about that there isn't resistance to these more enlightened perspectives.
Hmm.
There may be tension
Hmm.
around this that you see. But yeah, I hear what
Hmm.
you're saying.
But
Hmm.
overall, people are not, they're not, most people don't tolerate it. They can't, they don't like it. And, we can look at the weird connection points that are happening between the left and the right in this country here, the US currently. Random thing, people who couldn't agree on basically anything before. Now all of a sudden there's overlap between Bernie Sanders and Tucker Carlson, and you're like, well, that's strange,
Hmm.
you know? And I think that that is because of the evolution of the species. And I don't know how that occurs, but I tend to think that there is this universal, presence of what we're going to call mind that is there, that we have connection to, and that is also present with us in terms of our own individualized being. And we didn't say this, but that the process of enlightenment, if you want to call it that, is the transcendence or the unification, maybe better said, because I don't want to be reductionistic, the unification between one's individual mind and the universal mind while still maintaining your sense of being while you're here. So enlightenment is an eternal process, but the more that you work on it, the more that you are changed while you're here. This is sort of,
Yeah.
that's my
Yeah,
working
enlightenment
hypothesis.
is a word that has like a lot of different possible meanings to it, obviously, but that's a way of
Yes.
thinking about that. And certainly that's an enlightening experience, right? To think, okay, I can feel my connection between my individual sense of myself, my individual consciousness, and how that connects with either some bigger sea of source.
Hmm.
I can feel that. I can also feel how this connects with like the other living things around me, right?
Hmm.
So these are kind of these like interdependence kind of feelings, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's like this is like again tough kind of Zen stuff. The minute you start talking about this stuff, you find yourself in this place. But part of what I hear when you're talking about that would be kind of the Zen idea, like no matter what you're looking at, you can call everything Buddha nature if you want, or if you want to call everything God, you could call it all God, or if you want to call it all Brahma, you can call it all Brahma, or if you want to call it all consciousness, you can call it consciousness. I smile because I have a student who we joke about this because he's like, everything is just consciousness. And I'm like, okay, cool. I know what you mean when you say that, right? Everything is like one universal thing. You could say
Yeah.
everything is Buddha
Yeah.
nature. That's a thing. That's true, right? And then there's a certain kind of like insight and wisdom, which is just that, to recognize everything is manifestation of this pure energy, right? So
Hmm.
that's one thing. And I love that idea and I'm down with it. Good, that's true. The other part, and again, being a student of like the Dalai Lama school, they ask you to think about this other part of this too, which is like also I'm like supposed to recognize how what I'm experiencing in a moment by moment way is actually my mind working all the time. They want you to reflect on that piece too.
Mm.
And then they also want you to reflect the idea that none of us are immortal, sad, but none of us are. And there's something that's happening when a life ends, right? And even though all of this might be Buddha nature, ultimately, at some point, something relatively speaking that we're calling spirit or mind or consciousness has hooked up with some material body and it's going through its story, right? And at some point, they're going to separate, right? So even though all of this is consciousness per my student, and if you're listening, hey, hi, May, or Tao or Brahma or whatever word you're into,
Right. Love.
right? Yeah, whatever what you want to call it. You're saying there's some substance that everything is made out of. Okay, cool. There's also something that's going to happen that's more of that relative story that even though this all might be different manifestations of the same thing, there is something that's going to happen. Like all of us are going to have a life, spirit, mind, consciousness, whatever word you like, is going to hook up with matter. It's going to have its story and then it's going to split apart. And they want you to think about that too. And then I think what you're also talking about is the idea like, well, there's an interconnection between, we'll get to this idea of collective unconscious, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That there's this overlapping thing where all the different parts of the collective unconscious are kind of like connected to, right?
Hmm.
This sea of mind has like its own like interconnections between all of us. And what you were saying, well, the collective unconscious can learn and grow, right? And maybe some of the things that would have been horrible and shallow and terrible prejudices can get weeded out of this collective unconscious and there can be movement forward. So like you get into this stuff and all of a sudden you find that you're talking about all these things to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
You're like you have a like a you do have an optimistic view on that. And I mean, I think there are reasons to be optimistic about that, that the collective consciousness is growing, right? And then, that there's things happening within that. If you want to visualize that as like this big sea, and all of our individual aspects are just droplets within that sea that is now connected with matter. If we want to have that as our visualization, right? There are ways of thinking that that collective thing can grow and evolve. And I know like that's really important to you. You love that idea.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we can kind of start to weed things out that are toxic within this collective thing. And that would be
Daniel's
better for us as individuals because it'll be gone then. And the water
Daniel's
won't be
net.
as polluted, right?
It's not Indra's net. It's mine. It's mine.
Indra's like an old Indian metaphor of like how everything's interconnected, right? The god Indra has this big net and all the beads are connected. So yeah.
Hmm.
But you put more emphasis on that probably than I do, but I still like the idea. So when you bring
Yeah.
it up, I'm always like, okay, that's a very optimistic view that in the shared space that we're all a part of, we can start weeding out this toxic shit,
Hmm.
like filter out the pollutants in the collective oceans of our minds. Yeah.
Yes.
You have an optimistic view. So that's good. That's a good place to be.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know if I
It
share it
is.
totally, but I like the idea. So
It's okay. Glass
I'll be
half full
yeah,
on
I'll be
some
in on
things.
it. I'm in it. I'm in. I like it. When you
Yeah.
say it, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's
All
good. I'm
right,
in.
fine. Sign me up. All right, I'm good.
I'm
I don't
in.
want.
Why not? What the hell? I like it.
I don't want to. You know what? You don't want to argue against it. It just seems really depressing.
No, it's I like it. It's optimistic. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Daniel has brought
Yeah.
up this idea. Fuck it. I'll be optimistic too.
Yeah.
Fuck it.
Yeah.
Good. Why
I
not?
like it. I
Yeah, why
like
not?
it.
It's great.
Eric, I think that's a good place to call it.
Yeah, sounds great to be
Yeah.
picked up on next time.
So as always, my brother, thank you so much for rocking. Audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We are in our era, as they say. This is the flow right here. So if you've made it this far in the episode, congratulations. You are at the peak intellect of all human existence. Forget it. That's it. You're the best.
You
And
know
we
what's funny about that, Daniel? For signing it out, they had the thing I was listening to today about how, like, because you bring this up a lot, how bad human attention is now.
Yeah, human attention is bad, man. It's
So make
worse.
it to the end of things, y'all. We
You make
gotta
it to
like
the end of
we
things, and
gotta
this is a
make our
long
attention better.
and it's a long form conversation where there's a lot of gems in here. So people show us some love. Hit us up, leave a comment, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hit us up, Gin and Tantra podcast on Instagram. If you know us, send us a message, send us some love. It's all good. Tell everybody you love them. Life is short. Impermanence. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.